Hi, folks, and welcome along to my little cave where over the past year I've been very lucky that I've been able to keep soundtracking alive every week, which has been absolutely wonderful. And it's also allowed me the opportunity to launch this little companion show. And so we are in a brand new series of that. We dropped a brand new episode last week, and we've got another one for you right now. And about a month ago, I think we dropped an episode of the podcast with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and so many of you have asked to see it as well. So what we've done is we've put together Trent and Atticus, and we've also got Pete Docter from Pixar, because obviously the work that they've done over the years has been extraordinary. But in this past 12 months, us as film fans have been lucky enough to see the diversity of their work on Watchmen, amazing series on TV, and in the film world, David Fincher's Mank and Pixar's Soul. I mean, two very different asks of composers. So first up, David Fincher and Mank, an extraordinary film that if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix now, and it is the most beautiful and precisely crafted love letter to film. Fincher, if you didn't already know, is a massive film fan, and it just seeps out of the screen with this film. Brilliantly played Mankiewicz by Gary Oldman. But their relationship, obviously, with Trent and Atticus, with David Fincher, started with Social Network. And if I can encourage you to do anything at all today, please go back and listen to that soundtrack for Social Network, because it is a beautiful piece of work. Yeah, it was lovely to be reminded of, actually. So here are Trent and Atticus talking about working with David Fincher once again on his new film Mank, but it was a different experience. But I'll let them explain.
Mank, it's Orson Welles.
Of course it is.
I think it's time we talked.
What is it the writer says? Tell the story you know.
Hello, everyone.
Make yourself to home, Mr. Mankiewicz, or shall I call you Herman?
Please, call me Mank.
Mank.
This is Herman Mankiewicz, but we're to call him Mank.
Mankiewicz. Herman Mankiewicz, New York playwright and drama critic. Turned humble screenwriter, Mr. Hearst.
This is a business where the buyer gets nothing for his money but a memory. What he bought still belongs to the man who sold it. That's the real magic of the movies.
Thunder, lightning, blood, fire, religion.
Help! Someone save me!
All in one film.
That's director proof.
That's why I always want Mank around.
This was a very specific ask in terms of, you know, how authentic David wanted everything around and in this film to be. Hearing him talk about the lengths that he went to, you know, with his with Ren and Kirk about the sound design on it, and really it being authentic to the time. And with the music, was that an exciting prospect in terms of how authentic he wanted things to be, and what he expected and needed from you guys?
I'll start. It was a little intimidating and terrifying at first. You know, he called us up to say, here's my next film. Are you guys available? Yes, of course, we'll make time, even if we aren't. And, you know, it was a brief conversation. It's about the screenwriting of Citizen Kane, set in this time period. And he sent the script through, and our first experience was trying to decipher the script, and it became a little, I'd say, unlike any other project we worked on. It was probably the most difficult to understand what the story was going to be. Aside from the barrage of characters and historical significance of things we weren't that familiar with, quite honestly, it was hard to tell how it was going to play. Was it, how much humor was involved, how playful or how serious or how intense? You know, it was hard to kind of decipher that. And when we met him shortly thereafter for breakfast, that's when he kind of explained, I want this to feel as though it's an something found in the archives on the shelf that's been covered in dust. And I'm going to shoot in black and white, and I think we're going to mix it in mono, and we'd like it to feel like it's a companion piece to Citizen Kane. Maybe the score is tip of the hat to Bernard Herrmann. Maybe it's solo piano. Maybe you play against it and it's synthesizers. I don't know. We'll see what you guys think. We thought the idea of it feeling related to Herrmann, using orchestral arrangements as a palette, felt like it would be an interesting thing if we could pull it off. So we started playing around arranging with those types of sounds and that type of instrumentation. And in the meantime, in that last 6 months, we'd been ingesting music of that era. I'd been studying, because also there's a big band element we knew was also going to be a big part of it. So Fincher sent us a playlist of music that if he were to temp, he would temp in. And it was pop music of the era, Ink Spots, things like that. And we spent a lot of time just listening to it all the time in the background. Anytime one would drive in a car or just put music on, it would be music of that era to just let it kind of sink in. When we sat down to start composing, we were pretty amazed. And we're not ones to sit around and go, God damn, what we just did is great. But we were both surprised that we could adapt what we can do into a new shape. And it felt like it retained what we do well. It still had an emotional component. It didn't feel like it was a gimmick, which I think we were kind of in danger of playing into. Hey, reminds me of not just to ramble on, but well, I'll stop myself.
No,
Atticus.
go.
You can ramble.
Ramble's
Well,
good.
what I was going to say is something I use is we years ago, I heard, I'm struggling to make this connect, but to me it's significant. There's a famous band that we admire that plays synthesizers. And they had started experimenting with guitars and drums. And we have a friend who's a producer that worked with them. And I was asking, how is it? And he said, they're really into it because they've never used those tools before. I'm not sure to the outside world that it's as exciting as it is to them because it's a new thing to experiment with. And I think, just to put an end to that story, I think what they did do, if you can figure out who I'm talking about, was great. But it haunts me when we stumble into new ideas, that if we're the kid with the new tool, that to us it's exciting, but to educated ears or people that know what they're talking about, it's my first day with a electric guitar, But this felt pretty genuine, is the end of that rambling bit.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the composition, or the kind of start of it that Trent's talking about, which I was very nervous about leading up to. And then it turned into this fun thing, like Trent mentioned, not to use a stupid word, but it was actually fun. And we were working in this way of kind of like these three concepts: the solo piano, big band, and the orchestral stuff. But not knowing at that time, these were experiments to send to Fincher to say, what do you think, kind of thing. Yeah. And, we got this phenomenal response, and all caps text. I want to use it all. It's the best thing you can ever hope for as a composer, especially with him.
Yeah.
And but what was interesting about it was we were exploring rather than thinking scene specific.
Yeah.
And then Kirk obviously got the music and just started experimenting against picture. And it quickly became kind of obvious that the big band stuff could drive the studio kind of hustle bustle, while the orchestra could really tell the emotional story that you know, that was in front of us. And it wasn't strictly, you know, you can find moments where that isn't exactly adhered to, but generally, you know, the best thing is when you can see, and you know, like it's early days and it's rough, but you see a bit of picture with an idea, and you know, oh, this actually is going to work. And we ended up demoing the entire film. You could play the whole film with samples and whatnot.
Well, there's a lot of music. There's so much music in the film. There's, you know, the music is, and it's like it harks back to that old, you know. I remember, you know, sitting watching films with my granddad, and there would be so much music in these films, and it's really interesting you saying that, because one of the things I wanted to ask was whether if you thought about writing specifically for scenes or characters, because there's so many beautifully perfect kind of synergy between the visuals and almost like a silent movie type moments where, like, you know, when where Mank falls off the luggage, you know, at the station and things like that, and it's almost like a kind of Chaplin-esque type thing. It's so brilliant, but it marries, the music almost tells so much about the situation, more so than any dialogue does as well. But it's interesting you talking about the process of how the picture and music were matched.
We'll spend a month or two just writing, not to picture, because usually there isn't picture yet, but we have a script, we have a deep explanation from David, and we start to imagine, based on the clues and breadcrumbs that he's left, okay, what do we think would fit this palette, or how far do we want to kind of color outside the lines to see what he'll respond to. And when we send this batch out, which this is probably, I'd say 90 minutes-ish or so of music that we sent him, because we tend to compose in 4 to 6 minute compositions where we'll explore just different swatches of ideas that feel like the DNA to us of what we think the movie could be, or the range of where it could go. And then, as Atticus said, Kirk and David will sometimes temp in different moments from that to different spots. And what I mean, maybe a handful, 4 or 5 things that drop in certain spots that greatly informs us of what they're responding to. And oh, that thing we wrote that feels this way, he's feeling that as X, Y, or Z. And then it pivots into actual composing to picture. But that informative first batch always greatly helps, I think, David understand, or the director, and because we've done that same thing. I just poured water all over it. We've done that same process pretty much with everybody. And say for when we did Watchmen, we turned over a ton of music, of which almost none of it ended up being. It proved it let us know this is not what to do.
Yeah, which is almost as useful, isn't it?
Absolutely is, you know, because the process, you know, we tend to have a pretty long and involved process, but we're happy with where we wound up. It's nice when you get there quickly, but sometimes it takes a few laps around to do it. I think one of the things that helped us going into Mank was we went in confident. We had just finished a cycle of 9 Inch Nails and touring, right into Watchmen, which was an intense chunk of time, right into Soul, right from Soul right into Mank. And there was enough things thrown at us through those projects that we rose to the occasion and figured out how to do it. when the idea of can you compose all for an orchestra that sounds like it was recorded in 1935 and the rest of the score is an authentic sounding big band that should sound like a needle drop from something of that era. We'd experimented a bit through these other projects and kind of went into it feeling like, okay, if we can compose it, we feel confident we can execute it on that side. So it was we come out the other end of all that, proud of what we've done and kind of amazed that somehow we pulled that off.
I gave you a second chance.
You cannot capture a man's entire life in 2 hours. All you can hope is to leave the impression of one.
Why Hurst? Outside his own blonde Betty Boop, you're always his favorite dinner partner.
Are you familiar with the parable of the organ grinder's monkey?
There we go, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross talking a little bit about the process with working specifically on Mank with David Fincher. If you haven't watched it, as I said at the start, please do go and check it out. It's up on Netflix now. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. And then Soul, which written and directed by Pete Docter, who has the most extraordinary CV. I mean, Pixar have been able to do this phenomenal thing since they first introduced us to their way of storytelling, that it appeals to so many different generations of film fans. It kind of delivers a punch for every generation in a way. And Pete in particular, the way that he has written his characters and his stories over the years. I mean, I'm talking, he was involved in the original Toy Story, Inside Out, Up, need I say any more? And most recently Soul, the most beautiful animation. They just do it time and time and time again. And it was really wonderful to get the chance to get to speak to Pete, because it's very clear that for him as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, music has an important place.
Music is all I think about. From the moment I wake up in the morning to the moment I fall asleep at night. I was born to play. It's my reason for living. Hello? What the? Wow! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Help! I'm not done! Holy! Oh my goodness! This weird. The council. There's a soul missing.
If you look at the films that you've both written and directed over the years, music has got such a powerful place within those, and the themes that, be it Randy or Michael have created, but music is very much part of the narrative with this as well. What was the seed? Where did the idea come from for Soul?
Yeah, there's a lot of, the soundtrack
I like how you're rubbing your hands.
Oh boy, we get to talk about soundtrack is essential to the whole movie in this case, going way back to the idea of incorporating jazz. And the idea, I think it was this story we heard that the great pianist Herbie Hancock told about playing with Miles Davis and feeling as though he screwed up by playing the wrong chord at this concert. He said, we were having a great tour, and then I played this chord, and it was so wrong. He thought he ruined the whole night. But he said Miles just looked at him, took a breath, and played some notes and made the chord seem like it was the right thing. And he said, how did he do that? It took me years to figure that out. He says, Miles didn't judge what had happened. He just did what any great jazz musician should do, which is to take anything that happens and turn it into something of value. And we're like, whoa, that is the movie, right? That's what we're trying to say in the movie. So jazz as a metaphor, that was one of the first real strong pillars of the theme as we went forward. So jazz was essential. We got to work with Jon Batiste, who's a brilliant jazz pianist, also the band leader on the Stephen Colbert's show. And then we wanted, and I knew early on, though I love the work of Randy and Michael and all the folks we've worked with, we wanted this film to really feel different, to have a different kind of thumbprint on it. And I had been lucky enough to work with Ren Kleiss, who is a sound designer. He did the sound design on Inside Out. He also, incidentally, worked on, I think, all of David Fincher's films, and had worked with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. And so, even though it seemed very unlikely, we talked through Ren about possibly working together, and they said, well, it's a little scary, but it sounds intriguing. And we were like, yeah, it's a little out of our box, too. I don't know if this is going to work.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
That's what's great about it. I think is when you look at them as in terms of the work, the fantastic work they've done, and what they are providing us sonically with at the minute, and the two ends of what they do, Mank and Soul, and it's it's extraordinary. But you have to make those. You have to make there's so many kind of important elements to weave together. You have with Jonathan's beautiful kind of compositions, but then also the work that they've done as well, and then and making it really fit the story as well, so that it doesn't feel clunky or unnecessary. And you have this brilliant way as well, where you've almost created sounds and types of music almost for different areas. The kind of the sort of I'm trying to remember what the name of the place is. It's the Before Life.
Yeah, the Great Before.
The Great Before, yeah. And so that has this great kind of almost electronic sort of vibe to it that's just really lovely. And almost by the sounds, you know where you are in a way, which is really clever.
Yeah, and that was part of the design from the beginning. So we asked Trent Atticus to really give us music to represent the sort of ethereal nature of what soul is. And then Jon Batiste gave us the more like grounded, gritty, earth-based music that also is soul, Yeah, so, and then part of the thing that Ren did, well, it's really inherent in, and they were very open about this, that Trent and Atticus, they say, look, the music we give you is not just played out of the speakers. It's part of the immersion. You feel like you're in the middle of it, Yeah. And I think that's absolutely true. And so, the way they partner with Ren Kleiss, so that he is bringing his sound design in just the right way, that's not redundant or stepping on the toes of the music. It's all a carefully choreographed dance.
Were they kind of really excited about the idea of the project? Because, like you said, it is kind of not what you'd expect them to do when you kind of look at the kind of the composer and soundtrack world that they're used to being in. And I think they've done an amazing job. But what was there? Were they really excited about the idea of kind of not surprising people, but kind of, I guess, stepping out the expected?
I think they were nervous at the beginning, and to be honest, we were too. We were like, okay, the girl with the dragon tattoo is great, but if we put that on, kids are going to run screaming out of the theater. How is this going to work? Yeah, exactly. So it was fun though, because we brought them in, we showed them one of these storyboard versions of the film, and I was really nervous because some people have trouble seeing through these crude drawings to understanding what the film is about. So I was like, I know it's still rough, and you might not if you need me to explain. And they're like, we're kind of blown away. The film really spoke to them. Trent specifically said he has been through the same thing I have, where you feel like once I reach this abstract peak, whatever that is that you define for yourself, that everything in my life is going to figure itself out and it's all going to be perfect. And he said, he told a great story of having played his first stadium show and feeling like I've made it. And then realizing, wait, everybody at the end of that went home to their own lives and I'm the same guy, And so that's really central to the film that we're talking about. So it really spoke to them. And I knew as soon as that happened that we were on really solid ground, because I think for any artist, they need to be able to internalize and feel what it is they're talking about. So that was a real win that day. I felt like, okay, we're off to a good start. The way they worked. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go on. The way they worked, yeah.
Yeah, they're very different. So in the way we work with, say, Michael Giacchino or Mr. Newman, they typically we'll bring them in along the way just to show them what we're doing. But we don't give them the work until we're almost to a frame, picture locked. We know exactly what's happening, and then they write a score. In the case of Trent and Atticus, they started feeding us options and ideas along the way. So the scene is still being written, and they're like, here's 5 different ideas for what this scene, the music could be. And we'd go, ooh, this one is really cool, but let's use this other one over here. So it was much more of a, I guess you'd say, an organic process of iteration and kind of working around in the same way we work on the films. The music became part of that as well.
Pete Docter, I hope I get the chance to chat to him again, because I feel like I only scratched the surface. Really focusing obviously on Soul. So let's hear from Trent and Atticus again on their journey with Soul and how that came about and how they approached it. What was the appeal for you with working on this project, both in terms of with Pixar, with Pete, but also with Jon as well, this incredible jazz musician? And what was the appeal to this particular project for you both?
Well, with Pixar, I mean, this is a story we've told before, but we had at one point made a list of people that we would love, dream collaborators. And, Pixar was at the top of the list. And my favorite Pixar films have all been done by Pete Docter. And I mean, he didn't direct WALL-E, but he did write it. So,
yeah.
But art, I mean, he can make a film that simultaneously has the adult weeping and the child having fun. You know what I mean? And I think how it came about was actually through Ren, who I don't know if you've spoken to for this, but he works with Fincher. He mixed Mank, and he also works with Pete, and Pete had
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so Pete had this idea for a film, and I don't know if Ren was whispering in his ear or how it came about, or maybe he was asking Ren, do you think they could do positive music? I don't know. But the point is, to answer your question, we absolutely wanted to work with Pixar, and specifically Pete. We didn't know what it was, early on when we got the first call. We didn't know Jon was involved. But, once it unfolded, we did know it was a story, a kid's film about death. We knew that. And that was about as far as it went, which sounded great already. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I mean, look at the first like 3 minutes of Up, when you see that montage of their entire life together, and then literally with the first 3 minutes of that film, I was in bits. It's like he's lost his love of his life. Where are we going from here? But Pixar just have this ability to approach real life emotions, darkness and light, in a way that's just so incredibly powerful through animation.
And like you said, when you spoke to Pete, he doesn't seem like a guy with a lot of existential angst, but clearly it's in there. You know what I mean?
Where did you start with it? In terms of, you said you didn't know what it was about. You didn't know, you knew it was about, a story about death, but what did they tell you? And what are the conversations that you have in terms of what you start writing for? And knowing what you need to write.
With Soul, we were involved years before we needed to be. And I think it was what that filled us with was a sense of maybe we need to give comfort and prove ourselves a little bit that we can work in this medium, in this field, and in this out of our comfort zone, let's say. And we had an outline of what the story was going to be, and at some point we got an animatic a very crudely drawn entire full length with voiceover and temp music kind of experience that was surprisingly articulate and able to really convey what the film at that time was going to be in place of a script. And I think initially it was kind of set up so you guys are going to work on the various planes, and a lot of what happens in New York and the jazz music will be handled by, we think we're going to get Jon Batiste. Great. And at some point, those worlds will converge, and there'll be some overlapping of composition and performance. And so for that first, I'd say the first year, it was really kind of, and we were doing other things at the time, but we were thinking about, what do these other planes, the great before, the great beyond is what we were calling the different areas. What do they sound like? What kind of feel do they have? And there was a few examples of what animation could look like, but that wasn't even decided yet. So it was it was the challenge of how do we make something that emotionally kind of feels right, but has the correct perspective of awe and wonder, but in uncertainty and perhaps anxiety and perhaps dread. There was a lot of time spent, and we started working on the film chronologically pretty much. So as soon as Joe falls through the manhole and winds up in a black and white world where he's realizing he might be dead, and a lot of spirits are getting sucked into a bug zapper in the sky. There was a lot of talking about how should that feel. And that's probably where the context of it being a Pixar film came to the forefront of, we don't want to scare the shit out of little kids who, what just happened, Mom? Well, he died. Yeah. And so that became kind of the starting point for us to understand what the film would sound like and what instrument choices we'd make, what our process would be internally. And we got off on the wrong foot, for a good couple months. We wrote some pretty terrible stuff. It was us imitating what we thought a Pixar movie would sound like, as we learned our process.
Yeah.
One Friday evening, I remember, it was time for us to kind of hit stop and say, this sucks. What are we doing, man? I don't like it, you don't like it. We're bullshitting each other. We're just, we spent weeks and weeks, a couple months on things that were not true to ourselves. And again, that's part of the process though, that leads us to a place where we find the right way. And we knew we had enough rope because we had nothing but time at that point.
Yeah. It's amazing. I read as well that you said that that in terms of being welcomed into the family, that you'd obviously kind of nailed it in terms of what they were looking for, to the point where Pete's calling you up asking what you think of the process that they're at with the film in terms of the story and the animation, and if it's working and stuff as well. That must be an amazing thing to to see and hear.
No, it felt really good. Like when you work on these projects, scoring is still a new thing for us, and it's still something that we are filled with wonder, and we're learning an incredible amount in everything we do. We are far from feeling like masters of some domain. And when you go on these journeys with these different camps of people, like the Fincher camp couldn't be more different than the Pixar camp, with the similarity that they're both driven by excellence. And you feel like you have to run to keep up, and that feeling is intoxicating. That's why we do what we do. We've talked about this because as we found ourselves 10 years ago with Social Network and everybody thinking it's great and winning awards, and it was the last thing we'd ever imagined was going to happen. it led to different offers, and at some point us having to sit down and say, well, what are we trying to do right now? Are we trying to prove to the world we can score every type of film in the world, or are we trying to take on quantity? Are we trying to get rich doing this? Are we trying to, why are we doing this? Let's hit the pause button for a second. And it really came down to just that sense of doing your best work in these finite little intense episodes, say as opposed to Nine Inch Nails, which is a lifelong effort, you know, to go off on a 6-month, 1-year journey on working on an intense project with an intense group of people that you may not then see for years afterwards, and leaving it all on the table, and good days and bad days, you come out the other end, you know, changed and improved usually. And sometimes just filled with desire to, I can't wait to go back to what I actually do, my real job, Nine Inch Nails, you know. It's really been a nice way to gain perspective and inspiration. And we're trying to be around people who want to do excellent things.
You're out there somewhere, little soul. And I'm gonna find you. Life is full of possibilities. You just need to know where to look. Don't miss out on the joys of life. Like pizza. I can't smell. We can't taste either?
All that stuff is in your body.
No smell, no taste.
Or touch. See?
Okay, I get it.
Disney and Pixar Soul.
Get ready. Your life is about to start.
Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross and Pete Docter. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's a little bit of a kind of special, I guess, really, on the work of Trent and Atticus, and lovely to have Pete in there as well. Soul is up on Disney Plus and Mank is up on Netflix. Please do go and seek them out. Love it if you would subscribe to this YouTube channel, our little soundtrack and extra, which is a lovely companion to our podcast. And the podcast this week has George C. Wolfe, who is a writer, director of both film and theatre, and most recently directed Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which sees Viola Davis once again knock your socks off with a performance, but also slightly bittersweet watching Chadwick Boseman in his final performance. So that's on this week's episode of the podcast, but I shall see you next week for another episode of this, my little YouTube show, soundtrack and extra. Thanks for watching.